All right, there, that seems close enough to pick me up, I think. There we go. All right, I'll just also talk loud. Yeah, so as mentioned there, I just finished working on I just finished my graduate work in economics here at UM, which has been a lot of research and statistics and analysis. So when I saw the listing for this program back in March, I got very excited about an opportunity to do something totally unrelated to all of that and get back to my writing roots, which have pretty much been with me as long as I've known how to write. I've always just been fascinated at putting words down on paper and playing with their meanings and playing with phrases. And combined with my other artistic interests, such as drawing and painting and photography, I just kind of go around the world with that artist's eye of like looking at light and shadows and texture and color and shape, and then trying to figure out ways to describe that in words that will evoke the same things that I saw or the same feelings that I had. And so that's been a lot of what I've been trying to do here with this residency recently. So a little bit about my background. I grew up in the Midwest and then moved to the Seattle area and then came here. And so I've always had a connection with the natural environment and with trees and water and mountains. And I've always wanted to be surrounded by those things. And because of growing up in those environments and creating that personal connection with being outside and in nature, when I came to Missoula, I got very interested in the environmental work that was happening here. There's a very strong conservation and preservation community here. And so I got involved with the Watershed Education Network, started volunteering with them, doing field trips, writing for them, helping with their stream team monitoring program, which is also doing work on Rattlesnake Creek before and after the dam removal, so that we can get a sense of if there are any ecological changes that occur positively or negatively. We're hoping positively. The Rattlesnake Creek is already a pretty healthy, clean, clear, cold water, and now it will be connected. So we're very excited about that. And so coming in, already having some part of a relationship with the Rattlesnake Creek, both personally in gathering insects to show children or just to count for a stream team, doing transects, just wandering around Greeno. I was very excited to have an opportunity to be on site for this restoration project and get to write about it and pretty much just do whatever I want, which is a huge change from, again, like I mentioned, doing statistics and writing a thesis project. So basically what I have been up to so far, kind of how my process works when I'm writing a piece about anything, is it's very involved. I need to have experiences with the place, experiences with the people that are doing work in that place or exploring it. For example, in 2017, I wrote a piece about a trip I took to Peru, which was partly just because I wanted to go somewhere while I was in college, and partly to get some creative writing credit, so then I had to write something about it. And going into that experience, I wanted to understand how ecotourism worked, how it affected the local communities, how it would feel to be in the places that I had learned about in my Latin American history classes, how it would feel to be going on these long treks and retracing some of these journeys that people have made for thousands of years, and also just explore some Spanish culture and some Latin American culture in some places that I probably wouldn't have an opportunity to go to for a long time. So an example of how that translated into my work is I would pick up these little images along the way. So when you're going on a trek in the Andes or in an area like that, where there's a lot of textile workers, you find a lot of little bits of brightly colorful string in the midst of these very muted and beautiful landscapes. And it's just a little bit of a reminder that there are other people here and that there are other people that have been here and that you are not the only person to be there, and that all of your experiences, like this little piece of thread, can be woven into a bigger story. And so I would kind of blend my understanding of history and place and of the culture that I was learning at the time, and picking up on their local metaphors, such as the constellations of the llama and the condor and the snake, and bringing those into my own personal experience and finding those connections and metaphors in images. So what I've been doing here is basically trying to get involved in any little event that's going on up here. We did a tour last week with Rob while the workers were working. Most of the time we sneak up here when it's quiet so that we don't get run over. And while we were there, he mentioned that a historian was coming up to look through a trash pile. And so I thought this was really exciting to kind of look at how the people, the caretakers who were on this site in the past, what they treated as trash and where they put it and what the state of it is today. And this got me thinking back on the idea of values and what's important to us. And part of this is also related to my economics background and what is valuable. How do we measure that value? How do we determine if something is valuable and who gets to decide that? And so digging through this trash heap, we're looking at things that were literally thrown away, things that literally were not cared about anymore, didn't need to be used, and just became waste. And yet here we were digging through them, thinking about how fascinating and interesting these pieces of garbage were, and how they might be valuable, and trying to decide how old they were and if the ones from the 80s were as interesting and valuable as the ones from the 40s, and how could we tell which ones were which. And so that is related to the dam itself as well, because the dam is something that was very valuable and important to us for a while and literally sustained us as drinking water. And now we've decided that we don't want it anymore and we're going to get rid of it. And at the same time, we understand that it had some historical importance. And so pieces of the site, such as some of the roofing from the building, for example, they're trying to save those and use them in their reconstruction of this recreation area, kind of preserve some of the pieces that aren't in the way so that people can come and look at them and see what used to be here and understand what this importance of this site is long after the dam itself is gone and you can never tell it was there anymore. Kind of like at Milltown, you can't tell there was a dam there. And so when I'm here and I'm trying to be involved in just being here and having a relationship and noticing the weird little plants that I've never seen before and their colors and how they were named and whether they're local or invasive, and also our place as humans in creating our own history and rewriting our own futures and trying to match what we thought was valuable from the even further past. These themes of what's valuable and how do we decide and how age relates to that, as well as these very sharp images of, for example, the clarkia or the elkhorn flowers that are in some of the old pieces of trail that were filled in, and just how nature is kind of trying to bring itself back into different places, and how in the site, as they're building or as they're putting the dirt back in and trying to control the water, how the water just goes where it wants to go. And so these are all kind of ideas that are floating around in my head that I'm trying to bring together, this cultural history that I didn't grow up with, and this current history that's in action, and the history that we want to remember and preserve, and all of the life that's currently living here, along with my own personal experiences and understanding of what it's like to be in this area. So as a writer, I also am struggling with the format that this is supposed to take. As mentioned in my introduction, most of what I have been able to share publicly has been poetry, but poetry is actually a very small part of what I have actually written in my lifetime. And as I've been getting into creative nonfiction, I've been struggling with long form kind of essay type things which weave in all of these themes together, versus very short pieces that maybe just meditate on an image and what it means. without trying to tie it into anything and just acknowledging it for what it is. And then maybe I've been thinking about also doing some sketches of some of those images that really stick with me, such as the Clarkia or elkhorn flower, which is just such an interesting shape. I recommend you all look it up, or just walk along the trail up there. Just these things that are really sticking out to me that could pair well with a very meditative, poetic piece of writing, and whether or not that would communicate the feeling I'm trying to convey better than a longer essay, which would communicate better some of my more complicated ideas about what's going on here. I think that was a lot, and not really in any particular order, but yeah, basically where I'm at so far is just kind of writing out all of these ideas onto paper and trying to draw lines between them and where they connect, and how I could flow from one idea into another one, in what format I want that to take. So it's still early stages, but I've gotten past that collection of ideas and images stage, which is always really exciting for me, to go from having a ton of material that I don't know what to do with to getting an inkling of an idea of, oh, these are all much more connected than I realized, or much more connected than I even hoped. And you know, it's always interesting and surprising how many more connections there are between seemingly disparate ideas. So yeah, that's where I'm at so far, being that it's writing and that it's mostly just pieces of rambling in this notebook here. I don't have anything to show you guys, so just enjoy the stuff that Amanda has brought. And as far as sharing the work when it's finished, I know that was a question that's come up a bunch. Depending on when I finish, I'm sure there will be some online posting on various locations through Open Air, or like maybe the Watershed Education Network. They like to support the work that I do. And then also, whenever we have an exhibition next year, there will be places to read that as well. So now I guess I would like to see if anyone has any questions, either about why my background, or why I chose the site, or how my process works. Yeah, you?
Yeah, so talking about native and invasive species.
Mm-hmm.
You're surrounded by knapweed here.
Yes.
So one of the things that fascinates me is this idea of invasive species, right? Knapweed lives in Europe, came from Europe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Comes here, spreads all over the place, and then we decide it's invasive. Have you ever kind of, like, in your art, worked with that a little bit? Like, because beekeepers, for example, love honey.
Yeah, that.
Kind of a hot topic. It's interesting because all of a sudden, 100,000 years from now, all these invasives will become native.
Right. Yeah, so the question is basically, have I grappled with this idea of invasive species, and for example, the knapweed that is right here and has come from Europe and spread very well, and we tend to see it as a bad thing, and yet the bees love it and beekeepers love it. And this is definitely something that I have thought of on several different scales. So for example, just when I'm walking along the trails over here, and as a person who's not from this area, just trying to learn what lives here, and what is, like, quote unquote supposed to live here, it's an interesting process of just kind of trying to get familiar with the landscape as it is, and then the landscape as we assume that it should be. And that's somewhat related to what we're doing here. We're taking the dam out and turning the landscape back to what we think it should be. And that's kind of what, like, everything that we as humans do in a landscape is either something to serve us, or us trying to undo something that we've done to go back to what we think it's supposed to be. And I don't have a lot of understanding exactly of how the Native Americans and the Salish existed in this site beforehand, and that's something that I really wish I knew more about, and am trying to learn a little bit more about, because there is a way for humans to exist in the landscape and be part of the landscape instead of feeling like they're doing things to the landscape. And I think that invasive plants are kind of like a symbol of that, of our understanding of what we think should be here and what's our role in maintaining and restoring a space, and what's our role in just letting it exist. It's not one that I have answers to, but it's definitely a theme that I have thought about over the years, and especially with dandelions. I just wrote a field note for the Natural History Center about dandelions, and how they also came over from Europe, and they live everywhere, and they've lived with humans for basically as long as they've existed. They just love the sites that we disturb, whether that's digging for food or, you know, modern day building construction and roads and all that. And yet, as children, most of us still have a positive experience, a positive memory of the bright yellow flowers and blowing the seeds to the wind and, you know, spreading them even more. So yeah, it is something that I have thought about a lot. What's considered an invasive species? Does it depend on negative environmental impacts outcompeting other native species? I read an interesting piece recently that mentioned naturalized species, that sometimes a plant or an animal will come in and it doesn't take over anyone else's niche, but it just kind of finds its own and settles in and just becomes part of the environment, of the ecosystem, without influencing it negatively. And so that's also an idea that I've had about how do we become naturalized as people in a place that we've already had so much of an impact on. And I think this is maybe an example of that, or we hope that this will be an example of that, as one way of everything, of us trying to exist in a landscape with a positive impact. And as a transplant to Missoula myself, and someone who's moved around a little bit, trying to naturalize myself to this area by becoming familiar with it, by feeling at home in the plants and in the community. And a lot of my work with the Watershed Education Network has helped me out with that. That was a long answer to someone else have a question. All right, thank you. Thank you.